My daughter forgot to hang up her phone after our Sunday call. What I heard next changed everything I thought I knew about my family, and it saved me from losing far more than my house. My name is Clint Walker. I'm 71 years old, a retired contractor, widowed for 6 years, and until recently I thought I had a pretty good relationship with my daughter. Megan was all I had left after my wife Susan passed away. For most of her life she was a good kid, smart, funny, determined, the kind of daughter who made a father proud. Maybe that's why it took me so long to see what she'd become. The call started normally enough. She wanted to check in, ask about my blood pressure, remind me to take my medication, the usual things. We talked for 15 minutes. Then she said she had another call coming in and needed to go. I told her I loved her. She said she loved me too. Then I heard the click, or at least I thought I did. A few seconds later, voices filled my ear. At first I assumed she'd accidentally pocket-dialed me. Then I heard my name. And everything changed. "He's getting worse," Megan said. Her voice sounded completely different. Cold, impatient, like she was discussing a problem instead of her father. A man's voice answered. Her husband, Brad. "So how much longer do we have to wait?" I frowned. "Wait for what?" Megan laughed softly. "Not much longer. The doctor already mentioned memory issues. We just need enough paperwork to make it look reasonable." My grip tightened around the phone. "Paperwork?" Brad lowered his voice. "What about the house? The realtor thinks it could bring around $950,000. For a moment, I thought I'd misunderstood. Then Megan spoke again. "Once he's in a facility, selling it will be easy." A facility, not assisted living, not senior housing. A facility, like I was an inconvenience that needed storage. My chest felt tight. But the conversation kept getting worse. Brad asked what they'd do with the money. Megan answered immediately. "Pay off the credit cards, clear the gambling mess, maybe finally take that Europe trip." They weren't talking about helping me. They were spending money that didn't belong to them. Money from the home Susan and I had spent 40 years building together. Then came the sentence I'll never forget. Brad laughed and said, "You sure he'll go along with it?" And Megan replied, "He trusts me. He's pathetic." Pathetic. The word hit harder than anything else. Harder than losing Susan. Harder than retirement. Harder than growing old. Because it came from my daughter. The little girl whose scraped knees I'd bandaged. The teenager whose college tuition I'd paid. The woman I'd trusted more than anyone. I sat frozen in my recliner long after the call ended. The room suddenly felt unfamiliar, like I was seeing my life through someone else's eyes. And once the shock faded, something else took its place. Suspicion, because people don't start discussing nursing homes, real estate sales, and paperwork unless they've already started planning. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I opened my desk drawer and began looking through documents. I expected to find nothing. Instead, within 20 minutes, I found the first piece of evidence that my daughter wasn't just planning to take my house. She was already stealing from me. And what I discovered next made that phone call seem almost harmless. The first thing I found was a credit card statement. At first glance, nothing looked unusual. Then I noticed a charge from a casino in Las Vegas, $3,200. I hadn't been to Las Vegas in nearly 15 years. I kept reading. Another charge, then another. Hotel reservations, online gambling deposits, luxury purchases. By midnight, I was staring at more than $55,000 in debt attached to accounts under my name. My hands actually shook, not because of the money, because someone had been stealing from me for months, and I already knew who had access to my information. The next morning I called the bank. What they told me made everything worse. Several transactions had been approved, using personal verification details only family members would know. Date of birth, old addresses, security questions, information Megan had known her entire life. I hung up and sat quietly at the kitchen table. The daughter I trusted more than anyone wasn't planning to betray me. She already had. But the biggest shock came 3 days later. I scheduled an appointment with my attorney, an old friend named Walter Briggs. We'd known each other for nearly 30 years. When I explained the situation, his face became serious immediately. Then he asked a question. "Clint, have you signed a power of attorney recently?" "No." He frowned. "You sure?" "Absolutely." Without another word, he opened a folder. Inside was a document with my name across the bottom. My signature. Or at least something pretending to be my signature. I felt my stomach drop. The forgery wasn't terrible. Good enough to fool someone who didn't know me. Not good enough to fool me. Walter pointed toward Megan's name. So according to this document, your daughter has authority to make financial decisions on your behalf. I stared at the page. My daughter had already prepared the paperwork needed to take control of my life. The nursing home conversation suddenly made perfect sense. This wasn't an idea, it was a plan. And they were much further along than I'd realized. That afternoon I stopped being a victim and started becoming a problem. The first thing I did was create an irrevocable trust. Not for Megan, not for Brad, for my grandson, Leo. 8 years old, still innocent, still kind, still unaware of what his parents were becoming. Everything I truly cared about went into that trust. The money, the investments, the future, legally protected, untouchable. Then I made my second move, the house, the one Megan was already spending in her imagination. A private investment group called Red Shark Holdings had approached me months earlier about purchasing the property. At the time I wasn't interested. Now I was. Within 10 days, contracts were signed. Inspections completed. Funds secured. The sale closed quietly. Nobody in my family knew. The house they'd been planning to sell was already gone. They just didn't know it yet. If you've ever been underestimated because of your age, subscribe. Because experience is a dangerous thing when people mistake it for weakness. Meanwhile, I kept pretending everything was normal. I smiled during family dinners. Listened to Megan talk about retirement communities. Nodded while Brad discussed future planning. The more comfortable they became, the more careless they got. Then something happened that changed the entire situation. One evening, Megan stopped by with dinner. Chicken casserole, one of my favorites. She watched me unusually closely while I ate. Too closely. After she left, I noticed something strange. My evening heart medication looked different. Same bottle, different tablet. At first, I thought the pharmacy had switched manufacturers. Then I checked. They hadn't. The next morning, I took the pill to a laboratory owned by a retired friend. The results arrived 48 hours later. It wasn't heart medication. It was a powerful sedative. Lego, prescription strength, strong enough to leave someone confused, disoriented, and unable to make clear decisions. Exactly the kind of symptoms doctors might associate with cognitive decline. I sat staring at the report. Suddenly, every piece fit together. The nursing home, the forged paperwork, the debt, the house, the medication. This wasn't greed anymore. It was escalation, and they were running out of patience, which meant I needed to move faster. Because Megan and Brad believed they were only days away from taking everything. What they didn't realize was that the trap they'd built for me was about to close around them instead. By 3 days later, Megan and Brad left for Las Vegas. Apparently, they were celebrating. They thought everything was finally falling into place. The nursing home paperwork was nearly ready. The forged power of attorney was waiting, and in their minds, my house was as good as sold. I smiled and wished them a safe trip. Then I got to work. By the time their plane landed in Nevada, my belongings were already packed. The trust was fully funded. The house sale had closed, and every legal document they intended to use against me had been turned over to both my attorney and local authorities. For the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully. No anxiety, no fear, no wondering what they might do next. Because the game was over. They just didn't know it yet. 4 days later, they returned home. At least they tried to. According to the security footage, Megan was the first to notice something was wrong. The front door key wouldn't work. Neither would Brad's. Then they noticed the real estate sign. Sold. The look on their faces was priceless. They started pounding on the door, calling my phone, shouting my name, demanding answers. But I wasn't there. Instead, taped neatly to the front door was an envelope. Inside was a letter, a very detailed letter. I explained everything. The phone call, the forged documents, the stolen credit cards, the gambling debt, the altered medication, every lie, every theft, every betrayal. And at the bottom was one final sentence. You mistook trust for weakness. That was your biggest mistake. If you've ever had someone mistake your kindness for an opportunity to take advantage of you, subscribe. Because sometimes the strongest response is simply refusing to be their victim. The panic started almost immediately. Neighbors later told me Megan was crying. Brad was yelling. Neither seemed to understand how everything had collapsed so quickly. Then the police arrived. Someone had already reported suspicious activity involving the property. When officers reviewed the documentation, the situation became much more serious. The forged power of attorney alone raised serious legal questions. The financial fraud made things worse. By sunset, neither Megan nor Brad were talking about vacations anymore. They were talking to attorneys. As for me, I spent that evening sitting on the porch of my new lakeside home. A smaller place, a quieter place, a better place. Leo visited the following weekend. We fished, ate ice cream, and talked about school. For a few hours, life felt simple again. As the sun disappeared across the water, I thought about everything that had happened. People often assume getting older means becoming vulnerable. But age teaches lessons that youth rarely understands. The most important one is this: family isn't defined by who believes they'll inherit from you. Family is defined by who protects you when they have the chance to exploit you. And in the end, I didn't lose my home. I didn't lose my future. I didn't lose myself. I simply stopped giving my trust to people who never deserved it in the first place.